I know you're only finding out about this now. For those who don't know, he was the last king of Persia. He was a leader who brought modernization, rapid development, and great wealth to Iran. But despite all his power, the day still came when millions of people took to the streets to overthrow him. But why? How and why did a king with money, a strong military, and the support of some of the most powerful countries in the world fail? And how did the more than 2,000-year monarchy in Persia come to an end? In this video, we will discuss in detail the story of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. He was the last Shah of Iran. And we will also talk here about the revolution that happened back then, which changed the country's history forever. But before we start the discussion, I would like to ask you for a like and please subscribe to Arvin Polo TV. This is a huge help for us content creators. So let's get started. In the late 1970s, Iran still seemed stable in the eyes of many people. He was still in power, he controlled the military, he controlled the government, and he was supported by some powerful Western countries. But behind all of this, the anger of many Iranians was slowly growing. One of the events that further intensified the people's anger happened in January 1978. An article came out in the newspaper criticizing a well-known religious leader. But instead of believing the articles that came out, the people just became even angrier at the government. Because of this, protests began, and this was one of the first steps toward the Iranian Revolution. But to understand why that happened, we first need to go back to the origins of the family that ruled Iran. This story did not begin with Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. It started with his father, Reza Shah Pahlavi. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was born in Tehran in October 1919. He grew up during a time when Iran was in turmoil. The country had many problems. The government was weak, and Iran was often affected by the powerful countries surrounding it. His father, Reza Khan, was not born a king. He was just a soldier who gradually rose through the ranks of the military. He entered military service at a young age and eventually became one of the most respected officers in the country. As his influence grew stronger, he also saw more clearly the weaknesses of the existing government. At that time, Iran was still ruled by the Qajar dynasty, a family that had been in power for over a century. Although Iran remained independent, foreign powers had a strong influence over it. In the north, there was Russia. In the south, there was Britain, which had a major interest in the region because of trade and later on because of oil. In the early part of the 20th century, large oil reserves were discovered in Iran. Because of this, the country became even more important in global politics. When the First World War came, Iran tried to remain neutral. However, because of its location, it became a transit route and a theater of operations for various armies. This caused great turmoil in the country. At the same time, Iran was also hit by a severe famine between the years 1917 and 1919. According to historians, millions of people died because of lack of food, disease, and the effects of the war. Adding to this was the spread of the Spanish flu, which made life even harder for the people. Many Iranians lost trust in the current government. For them, the Qajar dynasty could no longer protect the country in the midst of the crisis. Because of this, in February 1921, a military coup was carried out by Reza Khan, along with some of his colleagues in the military. After the coup, Reza Khan quickly became one of the most powerful people in Iran. He first became the most powerful.
Tao sa Iran, si Reza Khan.
One of the truly unique situations. Within a few years, he used the military to suppress rebellions and strengthen the government's control throughout the country. As his power grew stronger, the former ruling dynasty became even weaker. Finally, in December 1925, the Qajar dynasty was completely removed from power. Reza Khan was declared the new Shah of Iran, and he established the Pahlavi dynasty. And this marked the beginning of a new chapter in the history of Iran. A chapter filled with modernization, major changes, and decisions that would eventually pave the way for one of the most important revolutions in the modern history of the Middle East. Nevertheless, in 1935, Reza Shah implemented a major change. He ordered that, in official communications with other countries, their nation should no longer be called Persia, but should instead be referred to as Iran. For ordinary people, this seemed like a simple name change. But for Reza Shah, it had a much deeper meaning. He wanted to show the world that Iran was not just an old empire in a history book, but a modern country with its own name, its own direction, and its own strength. Amid these changes, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi slowly grew up. Even as a child, his role was clear. He was the crown prince. That means he was the next king. That's why his life wasn't normal. He didn't grow up like an ordinary child. His education was strictly supervised by his father. There were military officers who taught him, because Reza believed his son should know more than just how to read and speak. He should also know how to follow, lead, and think like a soldier. But his father also knew that military training wasn't enough. If he wanted to modernize Iran, his son needed to see how Europe worked. So when Mohammad Reza was still young, he was sent to Switzerland to study. There, he saw a different kind of world. The schools were better. Life was more modern. His surroundings were closer to Western culture. This is where he developed the belief that Iran should also become modern. But while he was studying in Europe, the world was becoming more and more turbulent. Nazi Germany was rising, Italy was expanding its influence, and Japan was growing stronger in Asia. And in September 1939, the Second World War broke out. At first, Iran tried to remain neutral. Reza didn't want to just side with any major power, but there was one reason why the world couldn't ignore Iran. And it wasn't just because of oil, because Iran's location was also very important. For Britain and the Soviet Union, they needed to make sure that Iran would not fall under Germany's influence. They also needed Iran's route to send supplies to the Soviet Union while it was fighting Germany. So in August 1941, British and Soviet forces invaded Iran. The country's defenses quickly collapsed, and under pressure from the Allied powers, Reza Shah was forced to abdicate the throne. He was succeeded by his son, Mohammad Reza Mohammad. In September 1941, he became the king of Iran. But even though he was now the king, it didn't mean he was free to make his own decisions. He was still young. He didn't have a strong power base of his own yet, and Iran itself was under the influence of the countries that occupied it during the war. In other words, he had the crown, but his hold on power was not yet complete. As World War II continued, Iran became important to the plans of the Allied powers. This was where crucial supplies passed through. The Tehran Conference was also held here in 1943, where the three major leaders of the Allied powers, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, met. But for the Iranians, the message was clear. Their own country became a place where the great powers discussed the fate of the world, and their own leader was almost entirely on the sidelines. This is where Mohammad Reza Pahlavi's mindset was gradually shaped. He saw how the great powers treated Iran. He also saw how weak a king is when he doesn't have strong control over the military, government, and economy. So in the following years, the young man who was once just a symbol of power would strive to become truly powerful. But the way he strengthened his own leadership would also be the reason why many Iranians would gradually lose their trust in him. Now let's continue. After the Second World War, the balance of power in Iran began to change. For many years, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi had limited room to maneuver. He was a king only on paper, but many of the important decisions were still influenced by foreign powers and powerful politicians within the country. But when the war in Europe ended in 1945, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi had the opportunity to strengthen his own position. One of the biggest problems at that time was the presence of Soviet forces in some parts of northern Iran. According to historians, the withdrawal of Soviet soldiers was slow even after the war had ended. Because of this, tensions between Iran and the Soviet Union increased. The region near Azerbaijan also became a major issue where there were groups that wanted greater autonomy from the central government of Iran. In the midst of this crisis, the Shah gradually regained influence. While the power of other politicians weakened, his control over the government grew stronger. By the late 1940s, he was no longer just a simple symbol of the monarchy. He was gradually becoming the true center of power in Iran. Along with these political changes were also changes in his personal life. As king, having an heir to the throne was important to him. So love was not the only reason for his marriages. Politics and the future of the dynasty also played a big role in this. His first wife was Princess Focia of Egypt, a member of the Egyptian royal family. For many people at that time, this was a great achievement for the young Pahlavi dynasty because they established a connection with one of the most respected royal families in the region. They had a daughter, but their relationship did not go well. Eventually, they separated and ended up getting a divorce. After this, he got married again. However, the second marriage also did not last because they did not have any children. In the end, he married Farah Faradiba in the late 1950s. This time, they had 4 children, including 2 sons who are considered heirs to the dynasty. While he was fixing his personal life, a bigger problem was erupting throughout the country, and that problem was oil. If there was one thing that changed the history of Iran in the 20th century, it was the control over the country's vast oil reserves. Many Iranians believed that foreign companies were benefiting too much while Iran itself was not getting enough. Because of this, the call for the country to have more control over its own natural resources grew stronger. In 1951, a major change took place. Mohammad Mossadegh, a popular politician, became prime minister. One of his most important steps was his desire to place the oil industry under Iran's control. For many Iranians, this was a symbol of freedom and national dignity. But for Britain, it was a major threat to their interests. The conflict quickly escalated. It was no longer just about business. It also became part of the intensifying Cold War between the West and the Soviet Union. At that time, many Western leaders feared that Iran might fall under communist influence if its government became weak. By 1953, a crisis erupted that completely changed the direction of the country. According to documents released many years later, including records from Western intelligence agencies, there was outside support for an operation that overthrew Mossadegh from power. In the midst of the chaos, he left Iran for a while. Many thought that his leadership was over, but that was not what happened. After the events of 1953, he returned to Iran, and upon his return, his power was stronger than before. He had more control over the military, more control over the government, and he was more ready to push his own plans to change Iran. But as he grew stronger, forces were also slowly forming that would one day challenge his leadership. In the mid-1950s, it seemed he was at his strongest. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was in a position where he had already defeated his main political opponents. He was supported by the military, and because of Iran's importance in the Cold War, he also had support from some Western countries. But there was one problem that never went away. How do you govern a country that is so large, so complicated, and full of different groups of people? Iran is not made up of just one culture. There are different ethnic groups, different languages, different beliefs, and local traditions. In some regions, sometimes the influence of local leaders is even stronger than that of the central government. For him, this is a threat to the unity of the country. So as his power grew stronger, he tightened his control over society even more. The government gradually became stricter. There was more surveillance. There were more restrictions on critics. More people were being monitored by the state. In the late 1950s, Saba was established. It was Iran's main intelligence and security organization. Its official goal was to protect the country against threats both inside and outside of Iran. But over time, it also became a symbol of fear for many citizens. According to various historical records and studies, many critics of the government were arrested, investigated, and in some cases experienced severe treatment while in custody. Because of this, public fear of the power of the state grew. But along with this tightening, there is another part of the story that is often overlooked. While he was strengthening his control, he was also trying to change Iran in ways it had never experienced before. In 1963, he launched a program called the White Revolution. Despite its name, it was not an armed revolution. It was a comprehensive plan to change Iran's economy, education, and society. Its goal was simple: to modernize the country. One of the biggest steps was land reform. Back then, large tracts of land were controlled by wealthy families and powerful groups. Under the new program, a large portion of these lands was distributed to more farmers. At the same time, the government also used the large revenues from oil to fund new projects. More schools were built, more roads were constructed, more communities were provided with basic services. A significant amount was also allocated for the expansion of education. Over the years, more people became literate. More young people were able to go to school. More professionals also emerged in the country. Not only that, access to health care was also expanded. There were programs that brought medical services to areas that doctors and nurses rarely visited before. There were also changes in women's rights. In the 1960s, women were given the right to vote in national elections. For many Iranians, this was a big step toward modernization, but not everyone was pleased. This is where one of the deepest divisions in modern Iranian history began to form. While some saw the White Revolution as a path toward progress, others saw it as a departure from the country's traditions and religious identity. For the conservative religious leaders, the changes being implemented were happening too quickly. They felt that the influence of religion in society was gradually fading away, and as this tension deepened, there was a religious leader who was starting to become known throughout Iran, a man who would become the greatest challenge to the power of the Shah. His name was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, and in the years to come, the clash between these two perspectives, modernization versus conservative religion, would change the fate of Iran forever. As Iran's economy grew stronger in the 1960s and 1970s, there was another problem that kept getting bigger. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about oil either. It was about the direction of the country. Many Iranians were pleased with the changes brought by the White Revolution. More schools, more jobs, better infrastructure. More people were able to enter the middle class, but not everyone agreed with these changes. There were groups who believed that Iran was moving away from long-standing traditions too quickly. And in the midst of this opposition, there was a religious leader who became even more prominent, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. When the White Revolution began in 1963, he was one of the strongest critics of the program. He delivered speeches in various places. He repeatedly questioned the direction of the government. For him, this was not just a political issue. It was also a matter of religion and the identity of Iran. As time went by, more people listened to him. From being a well-known religious leader, he became a national figure. The tension worsened when he delivered a powerful speech in 1963 where he directly criticized the Shah. For the government, this was going beyond simple opposition. They saw it as a serious challenge to the authority of the state. A few days after the speech, Khomeini was arrested. This led to massive protests in different parts of the country. Clashes broke out between the demonstrators and the security forces. Many people were injured and killed in the chaos. Although he was eventually released, his criticisms did not stop. He continued to speak out against the Shah and the government's policies. Because of this, he was arrested again and later exiled from Iran. He was first brought to Turkey. He then moved to Iraq. From there, for many years, he continued his campaign against the Shah's government. Even though he was not in Iran, his messages continued to spread. And as his influence grew stronger, another thing was happening in the country. The economy was growing very rapidly. In many aspects, this was the fastest period of development in Iran's modern history. The income from oil contributed greatly, especially after the oil crisis in the 1970s, when oil prices rose sharply in the global market. But it's important to understand one thing. Not all countries with oil automatically become rich. Many have natural resources but are not able to use them properly. In the case of Iran during that time, a large part of the income from oil was used to expand various industries. They did not just rely on the oil sector. Production of goods also expanded. industrial goods, petrochemicals, cement, textiles, and agricultural products. Because of this, more jobs were created. Cities grew bigger. More people were able to buy houses, cars, and modern appliances. In the major cities, a new way of life began to emerge. More young people were able to go to school. More people were able to watch movies from the West. More people were attracted to modern culture. But while some saw progress, others felt that the country's former identity was disappearing. And this is where the division in society deepened even more. It was as if two Irans were slowly being formed. One side wanted to continue modernization. The other side, on the other hand, wanted to protect the traditional and religious way of life. Meanwhile, as the economy grew stronger, his confidence in his own leadership also increased. He saw himself more and more as the main symbol of the new Iran. In the following years, he acquired more and grander titles. He also held grand ceremonies to showcase the power and history of Iran to the whole world. One of the most well-known examples of this was the grand celebration in 1971 to commemorate the ancient heritage of the Persian Empire. Many leaders and guests from different countries attended this event. For his supporters, it was a symbol of Iran's strength and prestige. But for
Pero para sa kanyang mga kritiko,
the gap between the people. And while he was busy showing the world a new image of Iran, another struggle was quietly brewing within the country itself. A struggle that cannot be solved by money, by new buildings, or even by oil. In the 1970s, it seemed like he was at the peak of his power. Iran was earning a lot from oil. The military was strong. He was close to the United States, Britain, and France. And in the eyes of many countries, Iran was one of the most important Western allies in the Middle East. But inside Iran itself, things were different. While the government was getting richer, many ordinary people felt that the country's progress was not fair. Some people benefited a lot, but many were left behind. In 1973, Iran's wealth grew even more because of the increase in oil prices around the world. Because of this, his budget became bigger. He was able to fund more projects. He also bought more weapons and military equipment. He wanted to make Iran a regional power. This means he wanted Iran to be one of the strongest countries in the region. But as the money grew, the problems also grew. There are reports and studies saying that corruption became worse around the royal family, close officials, and wealthy allies of the palace. For ordinary people, what's happening seems clear. The country is getting richer, but not everyone is benefiting equally. At the same time, the prices of goods also increased. More money entered the economy, but control was not properly managed. That's why many people still struggled with their daily expenses. It's just like that. A large amount of money entered the household, but if only a few people handled it, and it wasn't used properly, it doesn't mean that everyone's life would immediately improve. That's how many Iranians felt back then. The country was rich, but many were still angry. And as the public's frustration grew, the Shah tightened his grip on politics even more. In 1975, he made it so that only one legal party could exist in Iran. This was the Rastaki's party. In other words, if you wanted to join official politics, you had to enter this party. For the Shah, this was a way to unify the country. But for many critics, this was a clear sign that he no longer wanted to have any real political opponents. This is where different groups became even more united against him. They didn't all share the same beliefs. There were religious conservatives. There were students. There were leftists. There were liberals. There were ordinary workers, but many of them had the same complaint. He had too much control. There was too much fear. And the palace was too far removed from the real lives of the people. Outside the country, Ayatollah Khomeini continued to gain influence. Even though he was in exile, his messages still reached Iran. There were sermons and recordings being passed around. There were supporters who secretly spread his words. Gradually, he became a symbol of resistance to the Shah. In January 1978, an article in the Attila newspaper sparked a bigger fire. It criticized Khomeini and his supporters. For the government, this was perhaps a way to weaken his influence. But the opposite happened. It only angered more people. Protests broke out. Some people died in the clashes. And in the tradition of Shia Islam, commemorating the dead after 40 days is important. That's why the cycle kept repeating. There were protests. People got hurt and killed. After 40 days, there would be another protest. And again, the anger grew. In August 1978, one of the darkest incidents during the revolution happened. The Cinema Rex in the city of Abadan was burned down. Hundreds of people died. Until now, the full details of who was responsible remain controversial. But at that time, many believed that the regime was involved. This further fueled the anger against the government. As the protests grew, the Shah tried to introduce some changes. He dissolved the Rostakis party. He tried to show that he was willing to loosen up politically, but it was too late. The anger was already too great. Too many people no longer trusted him, and the movement against him had become too widespread. In late 1978, millions of people took to the streets. This was no longer a simple protest by one group. It had become a widespread uprising involving different sectors of society. There were religious leaders, students, workers, business people, and ordinary families. They had different reasons, but most of them wanted the same thing. The Shah's rule needed to end. While all this was happening, the Shah became even more confused. There were reports that he even suspected some foreign diplomats might be helping the protests. He no longer knew who his real allies were and who his enemies were. And when some military leaders started talking to the opposition, it became clear that the foundation of his power was weakening. In January 1979, Shia left Iran. The official explanation was that he needed to rest and seek medical treatment. But for many, what happened was clear. He left because his regime was collapsing. After a few weeks, Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Iran after many years of exile, and he was welcomed by a huge crowd. And from there, the direction of the country completely changed. The Iran that the Shia once dreamed of becoming modern, powerful, and close to the West entered a new era. It was no longer a monarchy. It gradually became an Islamic republic. And here we see the biggest lesson in the fall of the Shia. It is not enough for a country to become wealthy. It's not enough to have a strong military. It's not enough to have support from major countries. If your own people have lost their trust, no matter how big your palace is, it can still be shaken by the anger of the people. When Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi left Iran in January 1979, he didn't just lose his power, he was also seriously ill. According to reports, he had been suffering from leukemia, a type of blood cancer, for several years, and his condition was rapidly worsening. Instead of immediately seeking treatment in one place, he moved from country to country. He stayed in several countries, including Egypt, Morocco, Mexico, and Panama. Eventually, he was allowed to enter the United States for treatment, but after a thorough examination, it was found that his condition was already severe. In July 1980, he died in Cairo, Egypt, at the age of 60. He was also buried there because he was not able to return to Iran. Meanwhile, the country took a completely different direction. After the Iranian Revolution, the relationship between Iran and the United States collapsed. It got even worse after the hostage crisis at the American Embassy in Tehran in 1979. Since then, the two countries have been enemies for many decades. The bloody Iran-Iraq War also followed from 1980 to 1988. After the death of Ayatollah Khomeini in 1989, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei became the new supreme leader of Iran. Until now, Iran continues to face protests, sanctions, and tensions with other countries. That's why, until now, people's opinions about him are still divided. For some, he is the leader who brought rapid development, modernization, more schools, and a stronger economy. For others, he is the symbol of corruption, restriction of freedom, and excessive centralized power. And perhaps both sides have a point. Because the history of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi is not a simple story of good versus evil. It is the story of a leader who wanted to modernize his country. But in the process, he gradually lost the trust of a large part of his own people. And that became the beginning of one of the biggest changes in the history of modern Iran.